I spent the first 22 years of my life living in Ohio. Located in the Midwestern portion of the United States, Ohio is a state, that's for sure, shrouded in mystery and meme culture, as well as one of the progenitors of the entire aesthetic of Midwest Emo. Ohio is a place where people leave or stay forever. I grew up in the Cincinnati area, jumping from small towns to bigger cities in the area throughout the economic turmoil of the early 2000s. At one point in a house in a suburb and another in a farmhouse built in the 1800s, I had a bit of a holistic Ohio experience. And my childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood were all spent there. I attended 4 years of college at Bowling Green State University in northern Ohio. And even now, for the majority of my life, Ohio was all I had. And yet, I left. I walked away from the Rust Belt, from the worst parts of conservatism and religious fervor, from poverty and poor education, from an old state filled with old people with old ties that raised old families. And despite all of my issues and reasons for leaving, after 3 years, mostly for my family, I decided to come back and visit just one time. It doesn't matter where you're from. Like me, where you grew up might be a place of abuse and toxicity, where you grew up and experienced awful things, and maybe like me, you decided to walk away. Well, when you leave spaces of abuse and you come back to them, it is only then that you can really understand what was wrong. I'd like you to come with me on this little journey, titled Remembering Ohio. Now, I won't be surprised if I lost a lot of people in that little opening. I understand that was a wee bit melancholic, but the sort of overarching theme for what the issue with the Midwest is that it's kind of a melancholy place. But that doesn't mean it's all negative. It's not actually like an awful, depressing hellscape. So to start, let's just recount how I got back to Ohio in the first place. As some of you may know, I am a weird fan of trains and a big advocate of alternative forms of transportation. So I took a sleeper train from Denver, Colorado, all the way to Cincinnati, Ohio, which was, I don't know, a lot of miles. And, well, just quick side note, it was a great experience. We took the California Zephyr to Chicago and then transferred onto the Cardinal. The Cardinal is a much newer train. It was very nice and very good and great to sleep in. But something that was definitely interesting about moving through to the Midwest via train is the views that we had and the freedom we had to watch those views as they went by. The cool thing about not being in a car is that I can pay more attention to our surroundings as we are moving. And I had so many thoughts about how the infrastructure of the Midwest influences the culture that comes up in those areas. But I'll get to that later. What I'm going to take you through now is some of the fun things I did when I was in Ohio. After 3 years and really like 8 years since Cincinnati, I wanted to re-experience some things that I enjoyed about the area. Now, for the youngest parts of my life, I lived in a suburb in a small town outside the Cincinnati area. And I would take my bike down to the local UDF, or United Dairy Farmers, which was essentially a glorified gas station that sold ice cream. And they had one of these absolutely despicable flavors, which was called Superman ice cream. And Superman ice cream is essentially ice cream that's more food coloring than it is actual ice cream. It's just a million different colors that have a nearly indescribable taste, and it is just absurd. But I missed that flavor, and so I wanted to eat it again. And it was in fact delicious, and probably made my ADHD worse somehow with all the red 40 in it. But it was great, and I did miss that experience. You'll notice a bit of a theme here, but it's mostly food that I miss. After that, we went to a literal Cracker Barrel, which is not exclusive to the Midwest at all. In fact, there are 2 Cracker Barrels in Colorado, albeit only 2. But I actually worked in a Cracker Barrel during some of the brokest periods of my life. I was driving a car that was old as me, And I had a girlfriend that lived in the nearby trailer park, and I worked part-time as a server at a Cracker Barrel. And somehow, I ended up missing that food a lot. Country cooking is in fact a good subcategory of food that I still enjoy. Now, I included all those details about what life was like when I was working this part-time job because I think that just also helps capture the overall aesthetic of the Midwest and what makes everything so depressing on paper. But at least chicken and dumplings is delicious. And while I was in town, I took a moment to do something that sounds fairly weird on paper, but is actually relatively normative in my family, which is visiting our old house, the one we grew up in as kids that we lost during the 2008 housing collapse. My family looks fondly upon this house and has visited it when they're in the area on occasion, just to send a photo to the siblings and say, hey, it's still there. The memories we had of peace haven't disappeared just because time moves forward. And it's a little house in a little suburb in a little town somewhere in Ohio, and it just reinforces the aesthetic and how I remember this place. Now, again, I went to college in northern Ohio, so some of my best memories with my then girlfriend, now fiance, were shared in northern Ohio and parts of Michigan. The Great Lakes region in general is where we would go hiking, where we would take trips, and where we would just have fun together. So we went to go camp up north in Michigan, just to do a bit of relaxing and be in that space again. And in fact, we actually went to the same recreation area that we went to for one of our first dates a good 6 years ago now. But on the way, as day turned into night and we were really late to show up to our little yurt campsite, we did something that was absolutely necessary for the Ohio aesthetic, which was take a detour to go to a Meijer at 2 in the morning. Meijer at 3 a.m. for today. Our key. It's cold, it's raining, and it's unusually late at night and I'm at a Meijer. So that's how you know we're back in Ohio. Throughout this video, you'll have seen a variety of photographs that I've taken, and in fact, many of these photographs are from the places that I'm describing and were taken on film. For one reason or another, I ended up having an interest in photography, maybe because of my brother, maybe because of my family, but I especially love photographing things at the border of man-made and natural. I've always enjoyed being outdoors. And an interesting parable, that might be the right word, but an interesting sort of theme, a motif of Midwesternism is the story of northward movement. My grandfather and great-grandfather were coal miners in Kentucky, who then moved up to Ohio to work in the steel mills, and my father was a steel worker. And I moved up to a college in the north to become educated and a teacher and an engineer that would then work on those same materials. And I spent my time in college in Michigan, further northward. And there's this sort of theme of moving from worse up to what is better, which is ironic and blasphemous. If you know anything about the lore, Michiganders and Ohioans hate each other for some sports-related reason. But the mythos is that everyone moves north in pursuit of something better. At least that's what I've experienced generationally, and I've been a part of that mythos and tale, that almost folklore of you start in Kentucky to move to Ohio to retire in Michigan. That's always been the theme. And so my fiance and I took some time during this trip to head up to Michigan and relax at a yurt, which is like a nicer tent, but not a hotel either. It's like a cabin. And it was great, and it was relaxing, just like the times we had done before. And it was at this time that I started to summarize my thoughts and feelings throughout this trip. Now, to finally answer what it is I came to realize, what it is that makes the Midwest Emo, it's pretty straightforward. And maybe it's because I'm not educated on these things, on culture and history. That's not my background. But as just a random bystander, My main thought is that the thing that made the Midwest so emo isn't actually the people, it's the place. Specifically, I think there's something about the geography. In other parts of the world, you are framed by what is around you. When you look up, you can see a mountain or a hill, or you can look down and see a river. There is an altitude to things where you're not always just looking at what's in front of you. And the quintessential Ohio is exactly that. You hop on I-75, the big interstate, and you drive for 200 miles, and all you see the entire time is nothing but field and farmland. It's like in Ohio, because it is such a flat place, and for context, Ohio used to be a swampland that turned into a slow, rolling set of hills that are partially touching part of the Appalachian Mountains, but not really. Ohio's a flat place. There is no altitude. There is no elevation. That's not entirely true, but a big result of that is that you can't see anything other than what is in front of you. The biggest thing in your life is the water tower in your local city. And so there's something about Ohio that facilitates a mindset of thought that is, by definition, narrow-minded. And I'm not saying that the average person in Ohio is truly narrow-minded. I'm saying that the rat race of living your daily life is compounded by the fact that you only can see what is in front of you, the people closest to you, the things that are within reach. Whereas in other parts of the world where there are mountains or streams or prairies or a greater diversity, you can see things that are bigger than you, that remind you to be humble. Now, obviously, that can't be the only reason that Ohio is so depressing. It's pretty easy to say, well, it's a bunch of empty cornfields and a lot of racism. That might mostly be true, but it's also the type of person and the history of groups of people in Ohio that have shaped its history. Ohio is partially Appalachian. You've got this impoverished group of people that found industry in automotives and steel and manufacturing, which now in the modern day is darn near completely gone. It's called the Rust Belt because of what it was, not what it is. It's rusted. It's fallen apart. And I mean, hey, like everything, that just goes back to the failed state of capitalism and the fact that this stupid cycle of rat-running industry was what brought Ohio to its knees and left it a place of soybeans and corn. It's because all of the communities were dependent on the number going up, on manufacturing happening. And so when the economy changed and so did the scheme of the world, Ohio was left behind not to rot, but instead to rust. I do not hate Ohio. I just think that maybe Ohio hates itself because it can remember how things used to be. But maybe it's that nostalgia itself that keeps the Midwest Emo in the first place. Just because something was in the past, that doesn't mean it was better. There were always issues, and there always will be. So at the end of the day, I don't hate Ohio. It's just another place. And for many people, it will always be their home and something happy that they can think about. It just so worked out for me that that wasn't the case. And I hope that's okay. But I swear to God, if I ever see another cornfield for the rest of my life, I'm going